When I think of a sacred text, I tend to think of a collection of moral or philosophical teachings, fundamental principles, or some sort of code of ethics. The Gospels, on the other hand, present something totally different. Yes, the Gospels contain teachings and principles for living, but they're all provided within the framework of a narrative. They're a story about one man. For the Gospel writers, everything hinges on their hero.
The first Gospel ever written, the Gospel of Mark, begins with the words, "The beginning of the good news of Jesus." The whole thing is about him. He is the hero of this story. Then the Gospels go on to describe a man who does incredible, seemingly impossible things. Yet what's fascinating is they present this person who performs miraculous acts as a very grounded, relatable human being.
I think that's a core concept behind the Gospels. Rather than simply listing Jesus' teachings, each Gospel writer felt it important to instead make him their central, heroic figure. Jesus is not a dry dispenser of maxims and codes of conduct. He's someone we're meant to connect with, a dynamic hero with a story. When I was a kid, the word hero brought one thing to mind: comics. I absolutely loved comics. Every week, I'd head to the comic book store to read about what my favorite superheroes were up to next. So even though it's been a while, I can think of no better place to explore what a hero's all about than a comic book store. This is New York's biggest comic book store, Midtown Comics, actually one of the largest in the United States. While I was there, I had a chance to speak with this guy, Andrew Cohen, their marketing and events coordinator. Andrew told me about what a staple Midtown Comics is for comic book lovers in the city.
Since then, we've grown to be one of the biggest comic book retailers in the country. We get thousands of people in here every week, pick up their comics, pick up their new favorites, follow their favorite characters. So
we went over the state of the comic books industry, how something that started off with a few loyal readers exploded into a huge part of popular culture.
Since then, it's grown exponentially. Anyone can come in here and pick up a comic book. You can see kids of any age, you can see grown adults, you can see businessmen, you can see a whole wide range of people who come in here and pick up their favorite comics. So it's definitely a much more eclectic group of people now that come in to buy their books.
And as that clientele has gotten more eclectic, so have the range of available comics. Midtown Comics has an enormous selection and an impressive variety of genres and subject matter, including some you might not expect to see.
But there's new indie comics coming out, cover a whole wide range of spectrums.
But when you get down to it, most comics share a certain similar quality.
The comic book industry is always going to be focused on, like we like to say, men in tights, which are basically superheroes.
And when you look at these superheroes, everything from their extravagant costumes to their spectacular powers, they could not seem more different from us. And that probably has something to do with their initial appeal, but what's unique about comics as a medium is they're able to tell stories over a very large period of time. In some cases, literally decades, through the perspectives of many different writers. And that's something Andrew highlights as vital to why passionate readers keep coming back to their favorite comic books. These fantastical, spectacular superheroes are able to develop a richness and depth of character that would not be possible without the many different perspectives that comics allow for.
Thor is now a woman. Things are always going to change, and it's always going to be a different perspective on a character, and that's what people like, is to see these different perspectives on their favorite characters.
If you can look at a hero from more than one angle, that's when they really come alive.
And that's what's so significant about the Gospel's depiction of Jesus. You're not just getting the perspective of one person, but several. And this multi-layered perspective of the Gospels helps to compose a rich picture of their hero and his personality that we would not have had there only been one Gospel. These different accounts come together to form a dynamic, complex hero with a depth of personality that is truly lifelike. For instance, Jesus is portrayed as a humble man working as a blue-collar worker, a tecton. Yet, his humility does not translate to weakness. Instead, we see moments where Jesus displays intense boldness, even anger in the face of injustice. Such as the time when he wreaks havoc in the temple to cleanse the religious heart of a community that was exploiting its people. He is also portrayed as being extremely likable and sociable. Jesus frequently appears at weddings, dinners, and other social events. In fact, he does this so much that some religious leaders of his time accuse him of being a drunk and a glutton. He was also criticized because he socialized with outsiders like tax collectors, sinners, and prostitutes. And throughout the Gospels, Jesus does show a tremendous amount of concern for those ignored and hated by his peers. He agrees to help a centurion, a soldier of the empire that is subjugating his people and occupying their land. He feeds the poor, heals the sick, and empowers the oppressed. Yet, he also has moments that approach melancholy. There are times in which he retreats from everyone, including his closest friends, to go, be alone on a mountain, and spend quiet moments in prayer and reflection.
In talking to Andrew about what it is that draws him and others to comic books, an interesting theme came up: relatability. Whether it was talking about the diversity of available comic books,
So really anyone, you can relate to any kind of comic book hero out there. I do like any other.
or asking him what his favorite superhero was,
Anyone I can relate to is a comic book I'm gonna like.
this idea of the relatability of comic book heroes kept coming up. And according to Andrew, it's crucial to understanding their appeal.
People like to relate to superheroes. It's something that, you like to put yourself in the shoes of, Spider-Man or Batman. You'd like to try to be that person yourself. So, the closest thing you can do is just read the comic and, try to put yourself in that perspective. So I think people like to relate, the best they can to, Peter Parker or Bruce Wayne. So it's the kind of aspect of, relating to this person who's kind of like you, but can have these powers that you can't have. So you kind of like to have someone that you can read about with those powers.
But there's perhaps more to it than just a power fantasy, as Andrew pointed out when we were talking about one of our favorite superheroes, Spider-Man.
What's important about that character is, he has that motto throughout the whole series: is with great power comes great responsibility. He wants to use these powers to, instead of, doing evil, he wants to use them to help people. So I think that's something that really relates to people is, this responsibility you have with these heavy weights on your shoulder. And it's something that I really like about Spider-Man. I think other people like about him too.
We may not know what it's like to fly or have super strength, but we connect to these heroes through relatable experiences. We've all felt pressure, responsibility, and the burden of heavy weights on our shoulders.
Throughout the Gospels, we find many moments in which Jesus is challenged by the burdens of the world, ones that many of us can relate to. For instance, he experiences the loss of loved ones. When he hears of his cousin John's death, he withdraws to a solitary place to mourn. When his close friend Lazarus dies, Jesus weeps and is deeply moved to the point where people say, "Look how he loved him." Later, Jesus is abandoned and neglected by those closest to him as he faces the most pivotal moment of his life. In that same moment, feeling all alone, Jesus feels the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's overcome with overwhelming fear and doubt, to the point where, as one gospel writer puts it, his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. But ultimately, heroically, Jesus gets up, faces his attackers, and moves forward with his mission.
Midtown Comics is a monument to the power of comic books. And that power comes from their heroes. Characters that are larger than life, that perform spectacular feats in impossible scenarios, and yet, at least in the best comics, are also grounded and relatable at the same time. That's how people are able to connect to them, and why they have such passionate fans. The Gospels also present a relatable human character that does seemingly impossible, spectacular things, one that they invite you to connect with. But they do something else that can be really hard to believe.